Hi, my name is Lillian. I'm 58 years old and have experienced 34 years of covert domestic violence, otherwise known as narcissistic abuse. But I'm not just a survivor. I am more than a conqueror in Christ Jesus. If this is your first time, thanks for stopping in. And to get a wider scope of what I talk about here, you can look in the description box. There's a link that says why I'm here. If you're returning, I'm sorry you're walking through this, but I'm glad you found your way here. And I'll always remind you to listen to my content with that one question in the back of your mind. Is my marriage difficult, or am I married to a dangerous man? That's the motivation for this channel, what my marriage was like and how I woke up to the truth that my husband wasn't a difficult, clueless guy when it came to relationships. No, he knew a lot, actually, and that's what makes him such a dangerous man. If you're starting to wake up and think that this might be your reality, please be gentle on yourself. You're about to step on a rough ride of truth, a darkness you've never experienced, but just know that you're not alone. I'm here for you. I hope this channel will be a source of awakening, validation, healing, and will show you how God uses a righteous divorce to free you from bondage of narcissistic abuse in your marriage. Just because a woman becomes a wife, it doesn't mean she gets a lobotomy and ceases to exist as a female. She's still all woman. And if you've not healed from any trauma in your childhood, you're going to try and live out of the relationship in the form of functional exchanges that are found in your role as a wife, rather than being able to collaborate in a partnership found in a relationship. What that meant is that Lillian, I disappeared under the office of the role of wife when I got married. So any kind of a relationship attempt, like whether it's connection, affection, or love, was forced through the nondescript title of a wife that I now wore. I didn't really notice it so much at first, and when we would come up against a wall or a catch-22 in our marriage, I was able to write it off as a bad day or stress happened to be coming at us from kids or anything, or life. It just seems easier in the beginning of marriage to not dwell on it. But eventually, in about year 6, 7, or 8, I realized that there always was an excuse, framed like a good reason, and that I wasn't actually experiencing any connection or affection or love that I thought I was, because the longer you go just living in a role, the more empty you become, the more your cup is not being filled up, the more you realize that you are not putting into yourself, your husband is not putting into the marriage or to you, and the emptiness and the starvation of affection starts to really, really emerge. I was already coming from a broken place in my childhood, so I didn't know there was such a thing as affection and connection because I'd never actually experienced it. So it felt natural to be treated poorly most of the time, and to be given breadcrumbs of attention when I did little things that were right or pleased him. I had moved from hyper control of my mother to hyper control of a husband who had pretended to not be controlling in the beginning. This is called love bombing. Love bombing is a ruse to capture weak and unskilled and untrained, broken women like I was. I never had the parenting that told me I was female or special or cherished. I know it sounds weird, right? But I was raised with the mantra, you're just like a man, you're equal to a man, there's nothing different or special about you. Men and women are exactly the same. And this mindset, it kept me blind, even though I had been born again for, I think, like almost 10 years by now. It kept me blind to who God had created me to be and unable to capitalize on the full power of my femininity. It was learning about femininity that I am created as a feminine Eve, not the masculine Adam. So I'm a girl full of estrogen and emotions and feelings, and not a boy full of testosterone. Everything I had been told growing up was a lie, and not acknowledging all my emotions and feelings inside of me and learning how to accept them as a part of me made it, I didn't know how to handle them, and I didn't know what they meant. They had been crippling me. I had been told that they were wrong. So the message to me was that everything I was feeling was wrong. I was wrong. And Christian teaching doesn't help us females to understand that there is such a huge difference between men and women. This is the difference of the polarities of sexuality, the difference between the XX and the XY. Whenever they teach you about marriage and relationship, they always come at it from the perspective of the roles found in the Bible. That's masculine teaching. So when I started to understand that it was okay to orient from my feelings, Dean did not like that. The more feminine I became, the more he hated me. Now, it felt like he hated me, but I thought that can't be true. Now, after the fact, I can look back in it in a much more unbiased and objective view, and I can say, honestly, yes, the more feminine I became, the more he hated me. There's a professor by the name of Sam Vaknin, who's kind of a narcissistic super researcher. He says that every male narcissist is a misogynist. And you know what that is, right? It's a hater of all things female and feminine. I can't verify his research for every other person, obviously, but I've heard enough stories and read enough recounts that are exactly the same as mine. Dangerous men masquerading as real husbands, demanding that their wives sacrifice all their femaleness on the altar of the role of a wife. The more womanly and feminine I became, the more physically passive-aggressive he came towards me. I say physically passive-aggressive because he never actually hit me with his fists or an instrument, but he came physically to me, like he would come into my space, he would tower over me, he would intimidate me physically, drive recklessly with me in the vehicle, things like that. I figured out why, though, he became more passive-aggressive, is because the more I learned about my feelings and emotions, that they could be trusted and that my gut was actually right, the more powerful I became in my autonomy, the more I accepted that God had created me as a beautiful daughter, the more I turned into what God wanted me to be, instead of staying as that emotionally weak and crippled shell of a barely functional woman that Dean had hollowed me out to be over the years. It was like being reintroduced to myself all over again, but a better version of me, because God was doing the remaking. And finally, step 5. It's important to say that I didn't really know yet. Like, I didn't really have that light bulb moment, you know something, but you don't really know it, really. I didn't know yet. I knew that after 32 years of living like this, I couldn't do it much longer. Not the way it was. Something had to change. I didn't know what. I didn't know how it needed to change. I just knew that I couldn't do what I was doing much longer. So this would have been around 2018. I recognized, although, like I just said, I didn't entirely understand what it meant. I just knew that I had started to do some research by punching in those things into the Google browser, which I talk about in the introduction video. What does it mean when this happens in your marriage? What does it mean when that happens in your marriage? I just knew I had a name to describe how dysfunctional we were. But I was so naive and so unskilled and so untrained with this kind of evil. I told him. This is part of being a highly sensitive person or an empath, is because, well, a broken. Not all empaths believe this, but when you haven't healed from your childhood wounds, you believe it's your responsibility to fix people. It's your responsibility to make people happy. And if there's a problem in the relationship, it's your fault. My fault. It was my fault. All the problems in our marriage were my fault. And so over the course of 32 years, I had researched and read and researched and read and researched and read. And it might sound like I researched and read to try and prove something to Dean, to show him how he was wrong, but I was trying to fix myself as a wife. Remember, I said, when you're broken, you live through the office of a wife, not the relationship. So I believed it was my responsibility to fix our marriage by trying to make him happier and happier and happier and trying harder and harder. It's my responsibility to try and discover the problem and fix me. Now, remember that dangerous men do not contribute to the collaboration or the building of the marriage. But I didn't know this at the time. He believed I was there for him, not him for me at all, in any way. But at the time, I didn't know that. I didn't know he was pretending that he was for me and for us. I didn't know he was pretending to be difficult and clueless, and that he was hiding all of his malevolence towards me. So when he came home from work that fatal day, I was so happy because I thought I found a solution to our problem, and I told him. Isn't that great? I said. We can fix ourselves. You're a narcissist and I'm a people pleaser. Mic drop. If you've ever done any research about covert domestic violence or narcissistic abuse or covert narcissistic abuse, you do not tell them. You've just unmasked, and that's the beginning of the end. That's why it got worse and worse and worse in our marriage over the next 2 years. I couldn't understand how it got worse. It completely baffled me. I know now why it did, but I didn't know then. If you're not familiar with the term HSP or empath, and you're staying married to a dangerous man, I can almost guarantee that you are one. HSPs don't give up on people. We don't give up, and we always take the blame. If we're unhealed, that is. A well-boundaried HSP is a beautiful thing, a powerful, powerful thing. But broken, you literally are like a little lamb walking through an open field, unprotected, by yourself, and you've got the eyes of wolves all over the place watching you because you don't see it. This is why we work harder and harder and harder until we come to the end of ourselves. We either commit suicide, which I tried, or we die early from a breakdown in health. generally some type of autoimmune. We just do not give up on people. I'm going to go into a lot more detail in each of these steps as my story unfolds on this channel. So I will share more about the attempted suicide and how that came to happen. But I had gained enough momentum from God at this point to make a plan. I didn't want my marriage to end. I still believed in better or for worse. But remember, I didn't realize that he was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. I had factored in being married to a dangerous man instead of just a clueless, difficult one. So my plan, I was starting to live in my boundaries, but I thought it was a boundary plan, but it really wasn't a boundary plan. It was more like an ultimatum, which, you're not supposed to give ultimatums in marriage, but I feel after you've tried for 32 years and you're not any better, you're actually in the negatives now. I didn't see that an ultimatum was a problem. And although boundaries did factor in hugely over the next 2 years, basically the ultimatum rounded up would be he could change our current marriage dynamic. He had the power to do that, or I would change the arrangement of our marriage. I said that, look, we're both Christians. We're both professing Christians. You've been a professing Christian for 10 years now. And God needs to factor into our lives and marriage if we're both professing to be born again. I need our marriage and lives to change by having devotions together. I want to attend church together. The church that we choose, it has to have a strong couples or marriage foundation. And I wanted him to get involved with the men at church. And I wanted us to go to a small group. I know that all sounds very bossing and very demanding, and it was. Remember, everything was culminating. I didn't know that I was actually being domestic abused by a covert narcissist. I didn't know. I just knew it was bad and difficult, and I cried a lot. I knew he wasn't treating me well, and that in fact his treatment now over the last 2 years was getting worse exponentially. I really still at this point thought he just didn't get it, like a really difficult husband that was so clueless about relationships and females. And I figured the more we were around people, the less time I would be alone with him, and others would witness his treatment of me, and maybe we could get some help. I did not know that it was intentional. He wasn't clueless, that he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew how much he was hurting me. That was his method of feeling good about himself. By tearing me down, the kids down, and everybody he worked with, every sermon he ever heard, that's how they feed themselves with supply. I was going to give my plan a year. If there were no changes that I had been asking for, I would be restructuring our marriage by moving out of the bedroom and into the spare bedroom. I would still do the housekeeping and the role of a wife because I don't believe in divorce. But I wouldn't be pretending anymore for our kids, for our neighbors, for his work colleagues or functions or church, anything. I wouldn't pretend that there was any kind of a relationship or affection or admiration or a brother-sister relationship in Christ between us. I didn't tell him that last part, that what I was going to do to continue to function in a marriage with him. I simply made the requests of what I needed for our marriage. He found the last part on my computer, because that's what dangerous, toxic husbands do. You have zero privacy because you're not entitled to any privacy. You have no anonymity in their eyes. You're basically not human to them. You are a tool to benefit for them at their discretion. You're their property. So everything that is supposedly yours is really theirs. And that means all your tech devices. If that doesn't sound like misogyny, I don't know what is. He found my plan on my computer, and he baited me into disclosing it. You know you're being baited into a conversation or a fight because afterwards, when you mentally track back to try and remember how it happened, there will be a blank spot in your memory. They will exist just before the fight that they wanted you to have, or just before they extract the information that they're looking for you to say or to admit, or just before you agree to something that you've been manipulated into. When you find yourself saying, how did that fight happen so fast? Or why did I say that? Or I don't even agree with that idea. Or why did I reveal that information? You find yourself furrowing your eyebrows together in confusion with a big question mark in your mind. Why did I tell him that? As you try to recount your thoughts in your memory, there's going to be a literal blank spot inside your mind. It's super creepy. I've got thousands of them. It's when you're being controlled, lied to, manipulated, or deceived somehow. Your brain, it's an actual thing your brain does to protect you. You don't have a space to put the treatment that you're receiving. Your brain, your heart knows what you're receiving, but your brain can't accept it. Your mind can't accept it. So it basically hides it from you. I know this is real because I was sexually abused when I was a little girl, and I didn't know that I was. The memory didn't come back until I was almost 35 years old. And your mind blanks out what it does not have the emotional capacity to deal with or to formulate. What I didn't know is that after I told him that I had discovered he was a narcissist, that was actually the beginning of the Hoover for me. He was pretending that he was really changing. We were doing the devotions. He was actually going on and on and on about how helpful he was finding them, and the church we were going to go to was a great thing, and he was really looking forward to it and acting like he was looking for a church and taking the lead and being the head. But what followed the Hoover and that 1.5 year period was the final discard. This is the scariest time. It's the most dangerous. It's when he slowly dropped the little bit of breadcrumbs and caring or love or kindness and literally changed right in front of my eyes. I wasn't giving him any supply at all at this moment. So his efforts to bait me and get me to react so he could rage at me and abuse me, then blame me, I stopped reacting to all of it. I held my ground and lived in the Hina that God had created me in. I stopped lying and pretending about everything, all of the covert violence that I had been taking into my personhood. And I started to live out of my newly understood healthy boundaries. I only reflected relationally exactly what he was giving to me in emotional connection and affection. Nothing. I responded to the surface conversations. I responded to the overt gifts and gestures that he was doing, but I didn't pretend that there was an emotional connection and affection between us, which is something I had been doing for 32 years. I stopped expecting him to be and do all the things that I'd been begging him to do over all the years. All the things in the marriage books. I stopped hoping for anything that was thought of as a normal, relative, healthy marriage. Wasn't looking for perfection, just progress or some indication that we were on the same page with each other. I stopped expecting him to ask me out on a date. I stopped expecting him to be the head of the family. I stopped expecting him to encourage me in any of my hobbies, any of the things I wanted to do, and I stopped encouraging him in his, which I had been doing for 32 years. I completely accepted his disengagement while he was sitting in the same room, all the terrible ways he had been invalidating me, our kids, and life. I just didn't give the space for it anymore. I didn't say anymore, that's just how your father is. I stopped being responsible for his part in the marriage. Instead, I focused on my part. I focused on self-love. I know some people don't like that word, but when you are rebuilding yourself from trauma and you're doing your own hobbies of learning piano and sewing and pursuing relationships with your kids and building new friendships, it's really just about living the life that I should have been living all along, instead of living my life more and more and more for him and diminishing myself more and more and more. Around him, I chose to live completely as my role as a wife only. I stopped looking for something I was never going to experience: mutual love and respect and dignity from my husband, reciprocity and encouragement of my own endeavors, and equal and fair treatment for collaboration of the partnership in the marriage we were supposed to be building. It was sad to see and experience how hateful he became, how evil he really was, but it was also freeing and empowering at the same time. I was living honestly and truthfully for God for the first time in 32 years. Closing thoughts. First, shh. Don't say a word about this to him. Discovering that your husband's dangerous is a scary place to end up. It's never where you thought you'd be, and it feels like an unreality. But your silence about your awareness of what he really is, that's your safety zone. And always remember, a clueless guy that causes dysfunction and seems difficult, he's not dangerous. But the malignant man is not clueless. He just pretends to be difficult and dysfunctional so that he can hide how dangerous he is.